The air in the original Crown Velvet flagship was thick, a living thing you tasted on your tongue, a heady mix of spilled champagne, nervous sweat, expensive perfume, and the electric ozone of pure, unadulterated anticipation. It was the kind of atmosphere that hummed in your teeth, vibrating in time with the sub-bass that was more felt than heard, a primal heartbeat coming up through the soles of thousands of shoes. The space, once a hallowed hall of exclusion with velvet ropes and colder glances, was now a throbbing, pulsing organism of humanity. Bodies were pressed shoulder to shoulder, chest to back, a mosaic of every conceivable identity, age, and origin. There were kids from the Foundation's after-school programs, their eyes wide as satellites, clutching the sleeves of mentors who had once stood right where they were. There were staff, bartenders, cleaners, sound engineers, who now held ownership shares, their posture different, straighter, as they surveyed the kingdom they helped run. Artists who had debuted in the pop-up satellite venues in Nairobi or Manila now commanded the main stage, their holographic sets syncing with the live band. Grandparents held the hands of grandchildren, pointing up to the legacy balcony with trembling, proud fingers. Everyone was here because a whisper had become a shout that had become a quake shaking the foundations of cities across the globe. Something is happening tonight. Something that matters. The cavernous room was draped in the signature Crown Velvet palette, deep, cosmic purples and burnished, defiant gold. Light didn't just illuminate here, it behaved. It pooled, it pulsed, it streaked like liquid amethyst across upturned faces, catching the sequins on a dancer's hoodie, the tears on an older woman's cheek, the determined set of a young jaw. The architecture itself seemed to lean in, the vaulted ceilings absorbing and reflecting the energy back down, a reciprocal loop of power. You could trace the history in the very walls, the original ornate moldings, now threaded with bioluminescent data cables, the marble floor, worn smooth in paths that once led only to the elite bars, now tracing the frenetic, joyful patterns of 1,000 interconnected dances. And then, as if the collective breath of the crowd had reached its peak, the central lights died. Not to darkness, but to a profound, velvety indigo. The bass dropped into a lower register, a tectonic rumble that moved through bone marrow. A single, narrow spotlight, white-hot and precise, lanced down from the heavens to strike the empty center of the legacy balcony. It was the same spot where, decades ago, a humiliated coat-check girl had stared down a room of her tormentors and decided to rewrite her story. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening, thicker than the noise that had preceded it. Every gaze, every camera lens, every hope was focused on that circle of light. She emerged from the shadows not with a walk, but with an assertion. Zara. Vanessa's chosen, her protégé, her living testament. She was clad not in gowns reminiscent of the old empire, but in a sleek, articulated suit that seemed forged from shadow and starlight, its lines speaking of both elegance and action. But it was her hair, the crown braid, that captured the light and fractured it. It was more than a hairstyle, it was a legacy woven into being, threads of onyx intertwined with filaments of actual gold, a map of constellations and struggles passed from one generation to the next. She stepped into the spotlight, and it wasn't that she owned the room, she was the room. The energy coalesced around her, a silent vortex. She didn't greet the crowd. She didn't smile. She simply grasped the mic stand, her knuckles pale for a moment, and let her eyes, those fierce, all-seeing eyes, scan the sea of faces. When she spoke, her voice wasn't the booming echo of a performer. It was quieter, clearer, a blade slicing through the anticipatory fog. It carried a weight that made you lean in, made your heart beat in the spaces between her words. They told her, Zara began, the words dropping like stones into a still pond, that she was incidental. A convenience. A pair of hands meant to catch what they discarded. She paused, letting they hang in the air, a ghost everyone recognized. They told Vanessa Monroe Bishop that her place was behind a counter, in the shadows, that her dreams were too large for the space a black woman from the South Side was allotted. That her joy was too loud, her ambition too sharp, her very presence a disruption to their curated peace. A low murmur, part acknowledgement, part old anger, rippled through the crowd. It was a story etched into communal memory. Zara's lips curled, not into a smile, but into something more potent, a smirk of profound knowing. They threw a coat at her. A thrown coat, soaked in the arrogance of people who think the world is theirs to hand out in scraps. They thought it would weigh her down. They thought it would define her. That she would catch it, fold it, shrink herself smaller to fit their narrative. She took a step forward, the spotlight following her like a loyal hound. But Vanessa, she caught more than wool and thread that night. She caught the lie. She caught the weight of their insecurity. And instead of buckling under it, Zara's voice began to climb, a crescendo building from a place of deep, unshakable truth. She used it as kindling. The screens behind her, vast and seamless as the night sky, ignited. But they didn't show polished advertisements or flashy graphics. They showed the raw, grainy, beloved footage from the night of the reopening. There was Vanessa, younger, her eyes blazing with a fire that time had not dimmed in the retelling, standing in this very spot. The footage was intercut with quick, powerful flashes, the first community meeting in a cramped apartment, hands tracing blueprints on a kitchen table, Vanessa teaching a teenager how to mix a soundboard, the defiant ribbon cutting at the second Crown Velvet location, in a neighborhood the guidebook said to avoid. She took their insult, Zara continued, her voice now weaving through the echoing beats of the music that had begun to simmer underneath, a slow, determined build, and she spun it into a crown. Not just for herself. But for the kid who got rejected from art school for being too urban. For the queer couple who wanted a space to dance where they wouldn't get side-eyed. For the single mom who just needed 3 hours where she wasn't mom, but was just herself. A goddess on a dance floor. The crowd was hers completely. You could feel the collective spine straightening, the shared breath drawing in. This wasn't a history lesson, it was an activation. And here we are, Zara spread her arms, encompassing the roaring multitude. The living proof. Their burial ground is our foundation. Their whispered no is the bass line of our yes. Look around. This isn't a venue. It's a bloodstream. And the pulse is ours. The music swelled, a powerful, soulful house beat layered with a choir of voices that sounded like both a gospel call and a futuristic synth. The screens behind her exploded into a real-time mosaic of the global Crown network. Not the flagship locations, but the life in the arteries. A pop-up in a reclaimed Barcelona parking garage, where local DJs were teaching teens how to scratch on makeshift turntables. A rooftop in Seoul, dancers moving in hypnotic, rain-soaked synchrony under strands of fairy lights. A community center in a Mumbai neighborhood, where elders were showing young girls how to weave traditional patterns into modern clothing, their hands telling stories their mouths didn't need to. A desolate, beautiful landscape on a Martian colony dome, where a group in crown hoodies had set up speakers, their movements slightly slower in the lower gravity, but their joy unmistakable, a defiant spark of earthborn rhythm under an alien sky. But listen, Zara's voice turned sharp, cutting through the celebration with a note of urgent warning. The snakes have found new skin. They're back. The music dipped, leaving her words stark and naked in the air. They see our light, our power, our profit, and they want to bottle it. They want to franchise the feeling and sell it back to you with a membership fee and a waiver. They'll slap a rainbow on a bottle and call it liberation. They'll book one diverse act and call it inclusion. They'll offer you a seat at the table, but only if you promise to use the right fork, speak in the right tone, and forget who built the table in the first place. A wave of angry recognition passed through the room. Everyone had seen it, the hollow, corporate-sponsored, pride events, the clubs that had urban nights as a marketing tactic, the brands using the language of revolution to sell sneakers. They sell you a watered-down version of freedom, Zara snarled, pacing the edge of the balcony like a panther. They offer you the door, but only if you leave your truth, your history, your messy, beautiful, complicated self outside. They want the culture without the community. The aesthetic without the heart. The crown without the cost. She stopped dead center, gripping the mic with both hands, leaning into it as if to imprint her words directly into the soul of every listener. But we know the truth, don't we? The crown has a cost. It costs courage. It costs community. It costs showing up for each other when it's hard. It costs remembering that the coat check kid is the future empress, and the future empress is the coat check kid. They don't want that cost. They just want the commodity. The bass returned, heavier now, a relentless, marching tempo. The lights began to strobe in time, flashes of gold against the purple, like a heart pounding in a chest. So we have a choice, Zara declared, her voice rising to meet the sonic storm. We can let them build their pale imitations, their gated communities of cool. Or, a breathtaking, dangerous smile finally broke across her face. It was Vanessa's smile. It was the smile of someone who has already seen the victory on the horizon. Or we can outcreate them so massively, so deeply, so irrevocably, that their copies look like the sad, flimsy ghosts they are. The screens shifted. Now they displayed schematics, open source code, blueprints. 3D models of modular, sustainable venue designs. Financial models for community profit sharing. The Crown Velvet signature lighting algorithm, line by line. Starting tonight, Zara shouted, the music climbing alongside her, the core of Crown Velvet, our community model, our venue designs, our financial blueprints, our survival playbook, is open source. Free. For anyone, anywhere. Take it. Adapt it. Hack it. Build your own crown in your own city, your own neighborhood, your own basement. We are not a franchise. We are a fever. And we're spreading. The roar that erupted was physical, a wall of sound that hit the chest. Phones lit up, 1,000 tiny stars capturing the moment, live-streaming the declaration to the feeds that snaked across the screens, where millions more were watching, crying, cheering in their own living rooms, cafes, and hidden spaces. They want to own the night. Zara screamed, her voice breaking with passion. We give the night back to the people. They want exclusivity. We give belonging. They throw their throne coats, expecting us to catch and shrink and be grateful for the scraps. She leaned so far over the balcony it seemed she might fall, her crown braid a slash of light against the dark. We catch those coats and we turn them into crowns for every single person here. The chant began somewhere in the back, a rumble that grew until it was the only thing in the universe. Crown. 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 Thousands of fists punched the air in time. The music exploded, not just a drop, but a detonation. The full, triumphant, orchestral house anthem crashing down, waves of sound so potent they felt like pure light. The strobing lights went supernova, bathing everyone in cascades of purple and gold. Zara stood in the eye of the hurricane, arms wide, head thrown back, drinking in the seismic joy she had unleashed. This was more than a party. It was a reclamation. A coronation of the multitude. So tell me, she bellowed over the cacophony, every word a hammer strike. Are you ready to catch the next throne coat and turn it into a crown? Are you ready to rise so high they choke on your dust? Are you ready to build a world so wide, so fierce, so full of unbreakable light, that no shadow can touch it ever again? The answer was a wordless, glorious scream that shook the foundations of the building. It was a yes made of 10,000 voices, a yes that echoed through the global feeds, a yes that was a covenant. And then, in a move that became legend itself, Zara vaulted over the railing of the legacy balcony. For a heart-stopping second, she was suspended in air, a silhouette against the blinding screens, arms spread like wings. Then the crowd below reacted, not with panic, but with purpose. A web of hands rose to meet her, a living safety net of her own people. They caught her, and instead of lowering her, they lifted her. They passed her, body surfing, over the sea of upturned, ecstatic faces, from the center of the room all the way to the main stage. She was not falling, she was being carried by the revolution she had just named. On the stage, the artists parted, and Zara found her feet. She grabbed a handheld mic, her chest heaving, eyes blazing. The music transitioned into a deep, soulful, percussive groove, the very first song Vanessa had ever played here, the one that started it all. A classic, rebuilt from the ground up. Zara didn't sing. She sang, her voice a resonant whisper that the sound system carried to every corner. This is for the quiet ones. The overlooked ones. The ones they said would never. She pointed to a young woman in the front, maybe 19, wearing a Crown Academy shirt, tears streaming down her face. Your crown is waiting. She pointed to an older man, a former bouncer who now ran security training, his arms crossed, nodding slowly with proud, wet eyes. Your crown is waiting. She swept her hand across the entire, heaving, beautiful mass of humanity. It's not up there. It's not in a vault. It's right here. In your hands. In your heart. In the step you take when you decide you will not be small. As the song built, the dancing transformed. It was no longer just a release, it was a ritual. A grandmother from Chicago showed a teenager from Berlin the specific two-step Vanessa had done. A group from Tokyo moved in flawless, complex unison with a crew from Cape Town, their styles conversing, merging, creating something new. The entire room became one interconnected organism, a visual representation of the network Zara had just thrown open to the stars. High above, on the now empty legacy balcony, the single spotlight still shone on the spot where Zara had stood. It felt like a placeholder. A promise that the balcony was never meant for one person to occupy forever, but a stage for whoever was ready to speak the next chapter of truth. In the crowd, a little girl, no more than 7, sat perched on her father's shoulders. She wore a small, plastic tiara. She had been watching everything, her serious eyes missing nothing. As she watched Zara on the distant stage, and then looked up at the empty spotlight on the balcony, she reached up and touched her own tiara. A decision settled in her young face, a calm, certain understanding. One day, she would stand there, too. Not to take, but to give. Not to claim a throne, but to remind everyone of their own sovereignty. Zara, back on the main stage, finally caught her breath. The music softened to a steady, warm thrum, like the planet's own heartbeat. She looked out, her gaze softening, sweeping over the faces, exhausted, exhilarated, reborn. The Empress's revenge, she said, her voice gentle now, but no less powerful, carried on a tide of affection, was never about breaking them. It was about building us. It was about making a world where a thrown coat is just a coat. Where the only thing thrown is love. Where the crown isn't a symbol of power over, but of power within, and power shared. She raised her glass of water, no champagne for this moment of clarity. So wear it. Your crown. However it looks. However it feels. Wear it messy. Wear it proud. Wear it quiet. But wear it. And when you see someone struggling to find theirs, help them weave it. She took a sip, and 1,000 people mirrored her, raising their own drinks, their fists, their linked hands. The story never ended, Zara finished, a final, radiant smile breaking through. It was just waiting for all of us to realize we were in it. Together. Now, let's dance like we own the future. Because we do. The final track surged, a joyful, explosive crescendo that felt like sunrise. The lights blazed. And in that torrent of sound and light and collective motion, the truth was indelible. The thrown coat had been unraveled, thread by thread, and rewoven into a tapestry that covered the globe. The humiliated girl had not just become an empress, she had become an idea, a seed, a song that refused to be silenced. And the crown, the beautiful, burdensome, glorious crown, was no longer a singular object. It was a reflection in every eye, a rhythm in every step, a fire in every chest. It was multiplied, infinite, eternal. It belonged, finally and forever, to anyone brave enough to reach for it, and generous enough to pass it on. And the dance, the great, unstoppable dance of rising and lifting, went on and on into the welcoming night.